You know what? I'll just say this. Is the grocery store gonna get mad at me if I complain about the carts not being returned?
Wait, what?
Like if I come on the podcast and complain about something or talk about something,
Yeah.
am I supposed to talk about no people, places, or things while I'm here?
Honey, you've got a big storm coming.
Hello everyone, how are you today? I hope you're having a really good day so far. If you are new here, my name's Taylor. I come to you from Baltimore City, Maryland, and here on my YouTube channel, I feature content that is generally focused on knitting and spinning. In this week's episode of what I call the Thread to Mend podcast, I'm going to review with you the things that I've been working on the last week since we last sat down to chat about knitting and or spinning. I am currently wearing my pajamas. This is one of my favorite sweatshirts that I found at the thrift store. It's from a local campground and I think it's so cute. It's when I realized I only enjoy wearing very oversized sweatshirts to sleep in during the winter. So I'm wearing this intentionally because I pieced together the 4 panels for my Ridgies cardigan, which I'm currently wearing. And this is a garment I intend to wear over any possible garment. And this sweatshirt being one of the largest in my wardrobe, I thought, what more perfect garment could I use to explain the armholes? So I'm not sure yet if I'm wearing it absolutely right on the shoulders. There is a collar. I was thinking about knitting the collar next because then I will be closer to finished and I'll know sort of better how it's going to fit over my shoulders for estimating the length of the arm. One thing I just discovered in reading this pattern is that the arms are fully adjustable. You can make the armhole much wider and decrease at a different rate to accommodate the cuff sleeve you prefer. So I'm going to kind of take the measurements. I'll probably take the measurement of this sweatshirt because it is my favorite fit. It just feels right. I don't know if this is probably a little bit wider in circumference than the Ridgies cardigan, but I do love the depth of the armhole here. And so what I did was I just estimated what it sort of is. So I took stitch markers and I tried to combine the ends here, and then I put a stitch marker right around sort of where the armhole is on this piece. So I don't know, does that make sense to you? You can see, like, I'm just trying to estimate the armhole for the Ridgies based on my favorite sweatshirt, and it is significantly bigger than the pattern. If I were to try to recall, I think the size that I'm working has a 36x2 stitch count for the upper arm area, and I'm guessing that mine's gonna be closer to 90. 36 times 2, what, 74? So 90, 74, that's like a little bit bigger. Not too much bigger, but anyway. That's my plan. I have 250, maybe 300 more grams of yarn. So I thought maybe do the collar, find out how much I have left for the sleeves, divide that in 2, and then I know like whatever amount I use for the sleeve, I'm gonna definitely have enough for the second sleeve. Right, so that's my plan. I feel like this is almost done. If I focus on this most, or at least get the sleeves started, I'm thinking I might do the sleeves 2 at a time because I have so many. Actually, I might only have 1 pair of size 8 needles, but I have so many like tools available, and actually this project taught me how valuable and time saving it is to have so many long circular needle cables. I had at one time like 6 different cables holding all of my stitches because I don't really ever use waste yarn. When I knit garments, I always use a spare cable. That way I just pop on my needle and I don't have to worry about transferring stitches. Many of you probably do that yourselves. Hello. Okay, okay. So I'm wearing this to show you how I like the look of it and how I think I'm going to modify the sleeves ever so slightly based on the encouragement of the written pattern. And I'm very happy with the way that the shoulder seams look. Obviously, if you're familiar with the Ridgies cardigan, there are pockets. I almost forgot about those. It seems like they're kind of like, once you're finished, you kind of pick up and knit, and then I don't know exactly what type of stitch pattern or like what type of stitching you use to affix them to the cardigan, but they're worked like after everything else. So that's happening. Although maybe you knit them into the collar. I'm gonna double check the instructions before. I feel like my hair looks a little cray today. I feel that this is the very best hairstyle for laying in bed and knitting. I decided to put my hair up like this because I signed up for a yoga class. You might not know this, but I used to teach yoga and I really loved that chapter of my life. I met the best people. They were the most active, the most interesting, the most inspiring people I might have ever come to know in the course of my careers. And I'm really excited to jump back into that community through attending at least one class a month, but possibly more. I haven't decided. Johnston and Heather are two radical and amazing human beings. And I have my full trust in them. And so even though I have a connective tissue disorder and I have issues with physical yoga practice and like just doing a little too much for what my body can recover from, I am excited to jump back into that. And I'm actually going to a lead primary series class, which I used to take a lot. I used to take Andriana's. I'm sorry, I'm getting way too in the weeds of local Baltimore yoga community stuff, but I love a lead primary series class. It's the only way for me to kind of jump back in because I have such a horrible memory. I forget a few postures every single time I jump back into Mysore. So I'm kind of doing the one monthly class they offer with the lead sequence to test the waters on maybe starting a more consistent in-studio practice. I don't know. I realized instead of doing the at-home DVD that I mentioned in my last week's video, since the first Friday is right around the corner, I'm going to jump into that. All of this to say, I have to postpone the Sunday premiere, which you now know, because if you're watching, it's later than normal. The Mysore practice, or the Ashtanga lead series is, I think, 8 to 9:30. So we're here at, I think, some other time. I don't know when, but I'll let you know how it goes in the live chat because it'll have happened already. So I'm really excited for that. I'm going to get out of the house. It is hosted at a jiu-jitsu nonprofit organization, which helps kids in Baltimore City, which is pretty cool. So sorry for the tangent. I'm just very excited. Mostly I talk about myself here on this channel, so got that out of the way. But anyway, I am knitting my Ridgies with Green Mountain Spinneries. I think it's organic. I lost every ball band. I couldn't tell you where one is, but it's a worsted weight, kind of DK-ish worsted weight 2-ply, light gray yarn. Very happy with it. I've had this yarn in my stash for many years now, so I'm very excited to apply those 10 skeins towards a project. So this will be my wardrobe, and it's gonna be the replacement for my, what's that Stephen West cardigan called? Brian wears it every morning and night. It's the funky one that he designed long ago. I've made quite a bit of progress on the Chained Oblivion cardigan. I'm so proud because I've put this off for so long and I'm finally getting started on knitting the body of the Chained Oblivion. I have steam blocked it and it's about 43 inches in circumference, I think without the button band, which is probably an extra 2. So it's going to be perfectly oversized, which is kind of my vibe right now. And here is the beginning. I've completed just a little more than a full repeat of the chart, so you can see the two repeated cable motifs. You maybe can't see it, how it's gonna transform yet, especially on this side. It looks a little wonky, but once I complete the next repeat of the chart, you'll see it's like one of the most gorgeous cable designs ever. Right now I'm working on these two projects, and I've learned that I am more productive when I have fewer projects to focus on. So although I really would love to do a Make 9 for 2025, and maybe I'll follow through with that, I didn't commit to it the last year at least, but I do have lots of ambition for the new year. Obviously I want to knit these two things. I've talked about my hand spun shawl desires, and so I would like to cast that on as well. That is on the horizon, as I've mentioned. So that's 3 projects. I also talked about knitting a vest by Teti, I forget her last name. I think right before I'm ready to cast off this, once I have it all intellectually sorted out in terms of reading the instructions, doing my decrease rate for the sleeves, once all the mental gymnastics are completed for at least this project, then I would like to cast on, or at least swatch and begin casting on that Natasha Hornby pattern I talked about in last week's video. I want to be near completion with one project, swatch for the next, and cast that on just like a day before I cast this off. So it kind of keeps my rhythm going, and I never feel a sense of like stalling, like a inertia come over me, which tends to happen between projects. I've also been contemplating a personal challenge of knitting a dog sweater each month, or maybe just 6 a year, because I have a few remnant skeins of yarn set aside specifically for sweaters for Shippy, and she's like 12 years old. Like, at what point am I gonna knit more than the few sweaters she has worn through entirely? She has one sweater right now that is wearable, in my opinion, and so she needs at least a couple more. Winter's almost over, but I would like to have another couple sweaters to rotate through. So I have in this project bag the next dog sweater quantity that I would like to knit, and I knit the dog sweater she's wearing right now in like 1 or 2 days. Like, I could easily knit it in a weekend day because she's such a small dog. And I think what I might do is just simply recreate the dog version of the throw over that I knit her with these 2 yarns. This is a hand spun yarn. Well, they're both hand spun, but this is like a color changing one, and then this is just one with sparkle. It's some of my earliest hand spun yarn. It's quite heavy and a little ropey, which is perfect for a dog sweater. And so I would very much like to challenge myself to knit at least 6 dog sweaters this year. So I have like all the yarn set aside. I want to do it. I think I might have to complete this challenge between garments. So once I finish one garment, I knit the dog sweater, and then I get to work on the next garment. So if I do complete 6 dog sweaters, then I'm already at 8, 9, 10 with the Teti vest, which I mentioned. I think it's doable. I have my mojo back. I'm knitting again. Obviously, I haven't been working all week, so I have a lot more time for knitting, but I try not to turn the television on until after 5 p.m. That way I can kind of stay in a rhythm of productivity between like 9 to 5, so I'm not like a total bed rotten woman. So much to knit, so little time. I think when your intentions are to knit from your stash, it can be a little overwhelming when you have quite a bit of stash, and I want to like find a project for everything. It hasn't helped. It has only stalled my progress on getting knitting done, which is the ultimate goal. And so I'm trying to focus my attention only on the ultimate goal of knitting the projects I've started. So that's what I've been doing, knitting the projects that I've started, and I very much enjoy it. And I've had a great week. It's been very restful. And this will be the last video I post online before that job starts. Yeah, I'm excited to just have a new routine, and be around different people that maybe I'm just more aligned with. That is that on that. And I'm gonna change out of my pajamas now because it's probably close to noon already. I'm gonna do some chores, pick up the house, and today's Friday, so I'm gonna roast a chicken.
What are you gonna do? Are you gonna eat that or checks?
Hey, you've got visitors, Daisy.
I want some co-lace.
Talk to Melvin tomorrow.
I always thought you were like Janet, but then here you are with this chicken. So what's with that, huh?
I don't know when, but before next week, there are a few other things I would like to accomplish. I feel like I've run out of time, but I need to remember that I have 2.5 full days ahead of me to get some other things done. I have acquired this gorgeous cashmere sweater from the thrift store. It's originally from J. Crew, and while I was washing it, I found 3 more holes in it. I mended quite a few holes when I brought this home, thinking I found them all, and there are 2 in the back and 1 in the shoulder seam, I think, I forget. But I do need to mend this gorgeous sweater, and then I do need to I want to rip out these things that I've knit. This is a sweater I knit long ago, I never wear, and the project I talked about last week. I would like to tear those out, and then I don't know if I should do it now or wait till I'm ready to knit them, but these Wanderer slippers by Andrew Mowry are knit in a 80-10-10 cashmere merino and nylon yarn that just stretched tremendously, and I would like to reclaim this yarn to knit into a couple pairs of DK weight socks. So one day I would very much like to undo these and reskein them, give them a good wash, and reknit. But I think I might sit on that. I might just stuff these in a drawer because knitting socks isn't my hugest priority. I think I would like to cast on a pair of socks though, maybe after I start my new job. It's possible that I might take, instead of driving my car to park in a garage, that costs, I have to work in the office like 2 days a week. I was thinking I might take the shuttle, and that would mean that I might have to wait at the bus stop 1 or 2 times each day, and that could take about, I don't know, 2 hours more or less of knitting time. So I could find a small project to cast on and bring with me, and a sock would be perfect for that. So I would like to have more hand knit socks in my wardrobe because I've kind of worn through a lot of my other pairs and I don't have many at all. That is it for this week's episode of the Thread to Mend podcast. I want to thank you so much for watching. If you would like to find me on social media, I am on Ravelry and Instagram as TAYLOREOWEN. I believe that is the same handle on Blue Sky if you want to follow me there. And again, I want to thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day, a wonderful week, and that you take care.
On the Majority Report, it is a pleasure to welcome to the program Richard Seymour, writer, commentator based in London, author of Disaster Nationalism, The Downfall of Liberal Civilization. Richard, thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Let's start first with just, I guess, the most obvious question. Disaster nationalism, what is that, and why is it under your your notion that it's sort of a proto-fascism?
Sure. Well, we live in a world which is not short of real disasters. You only have to look at Los Angeles at the moment, for example. Ecological disasters, economic disasters, wars, all that sort of thing. And I've noticed for a few years now, actually go back to the Tea Party movement, that there was an increasing emphasis on the right, the far right, on illusory, imaginary, hallucinated disasters, FEMA death camps, Obama's fake birth certificate, more recently, white genocide, great replacement. They're obsessed with imaginary disasters where there is actually real disasters in front of them. And what I argue is that quite often there's a direct connection between the two. So, for example, you remember the wildfires in Oregon in 2020, the most severe in decades, largely exacerbated by climate change. And this compounded a lot of really bad experiences locally over the last few years, from the credit crunch, rising rural poverty, destruction of local news, rising addiction. This is before the fentanyl crisis, alcoholism, suicide rates soaring, all of that stuff happening. And then this comes along. And there are people who think that it's just too weird. It's too much, too many fires. What's causing this? And they decide it's Antifa. They're setting fire. And they had been listening to rumors on YouTube for a long time telling them that there was an Antifa conspiracy. It was going to kill all the white conservative Christians. And they said, they looked at the COVID lockdown and they said, that's liberal tyranny. And they looked at the Black Lives Matter riots and protests and they said, that's the sedition. They're coming for us. They're burning down the cities. Now they're going to burn us down. And that rumor spread spontaneously. It's an apocalyptic rumor. It didn't require any support. Only after the fact did Donald Trump and local police big it up and spread it across social media networks. That's typical of the kind of process that we see already today. We can see that in the case of Los Angeles, where there are rumors that Mayor Bass cut funding on firefighters, which she did, but in order to spend on diversity and inclusion and so on, which she didn't. I mean, it was a general austerity program. So that's disaster nationalism. It's a way of turning a disaster, which is very difficult to deal with, abstract, remote, climate change, capitalism. You can't shoot these things, but Antifa, you can shoot. And then you can go and shoot at Black Lives Matter and stab them and use vehicular attacks. And then you can go to Congress or the Capitol building and try and string up the communists who you say are in charge. This is a very animating, exciting alternative to the common experience of going through a series of disasters, which is to feel demoralized, bludgeoned, incapable of action, apathetic, and so on. That's disaster nationalism. Why is it incipiently fascist? I simply want to say that clearly there are elements that are similar to the traditional experience of fascism. The racial violence, the yearning, the hungering for a dictatorship. You remember the QAnon fantasy was a storm, a day of reckoning. And they were going to round up all the leftists and the liberals and the Hollywood celebrities and the Democrats, put them in Guantanamo.
I'm also signing an executive order to instruct the Departments of Defense and Homeland Security to begin preparing the 30,000-person migrant facility at Guantanamo Bay. Most people don't even know about it.
Guantanamo is probably the #1 recruitment tool that is used by these jihadist organizations.
Keeping Guantanamo opening it in the first place, represented a national security threat to the United States, and it already has.
The detainees lived in outdoor cells with concrete floors and exposed pipes for toilets. We had never seen these cells before. It was all under wraps and no one knew what was really happening here. Now we're seeing it.
We will cover that
it's just as bad as we imagined.
So this was the headquarters area. There was no air conditioning here on camp. The only facility that did have air conditioning is on the left here, this little shack. It was the guard dog facility.
It's a fascist fantasy. What they don't have yet is the kind of political or ideological maturity to realize any of these objectives. They tried the January 6th insurrection. They tried a pseudo-insurrection in Brazil when Bolsonaro was defeated. There was the Reichsbürger plot in Germany. They don't have paramilitary movements. They don't have organized parties, except in India. India is a unique case. The violence that we see is largely networked, it's decentralized. I would say that there are elements of fascism congealing, forming, and these fascist elements are in coalition with the more traditional hard right. Disaster nationalism, as I'm calling it, gives you something to take arms against, which again, it's very exciting, but it doesn't solve anything because like any symptom, it exists to avoid the solution.
Why is this era happening now, and why is it international?
So I would say a couple of things about that. First of all, I think there's always fascist elements in a democratic society. And in the United States in particular, I mean, I did my PhD thesis on anti-communism in the South during the civil rights movement. And there was elements of fascist organizing there for sure. You had these institutions called state sovereignty councils, which were like petty dictatorships. They could get anyone banned, anyone barred, you know, and they basically worked in conjunction with white citizens' councils and the clans and so on. So there's an incipient fascist network taking form there around the theme of anti-communism. You know, the civil rights people are all communists. That's always been there, or versions of that have always been there. And I think, personally, I think as long as we live in a capitalist society, that's going to be a potential. There are massive differences, though, and I think this is really important. First of all, today's so-called disaster nationalism is not trying to overthrow democracy yet. Anti-liberal movement for sure, and it seeks to tilt the balance, you know, constitutionally in favor of much more authoritarianism. But you haven't seen them try to crush democratic institutions. Rather, they claim to speak up for a very ethnically exclusionary, majoritarian version of democracy. So that's what they're trying to do. Second thing is they, as I said, they don't have the organization. You know, classical fascism emerged from thick civic society organization. Even, you know, the American example I gave, I talked about white citizens councils, clans, and so on. You don't really have that today. You know, in America, you have some militias, but really a lot of it is anomic. Like, this is why you get lone wolf murderers, because there's a lack of organization on their side. And in fact, a lack of social behavior more generally. You know, that's a trend that's been happening in America. I think India is a big exception where you do have something like a matured fascism coming into being, because you've got, you know, these civil society organizations like the RSS and so on, which and paramilitaries, which do have deep roots in the society. But I think most of what we're seeing today is very isolated, and it's not very utopian. That's another distinction. Historically, fascism promised a kind of utopia. It claimed to be anti-capitalist. It claimed that it would do something radically new and different, and that was rooted in the colonial perspective. We're going to take some land, and we're going to turn it over to you and your family and your kids, and you're going to have a great existence. And there will be people there, say tens of millions of Russians, to be slaves for you. And your world would be a lot better. That was the utopian perspective. Doesn't have anything like that today. Today, it's a very defensive, white nationalist, bordered worldview. I shouldn't say white nationalist because globally that doesn't really play. Right. But it's very defensive, nationalist, bordered, and it's much more predicated on the organization and harnessing of aggression. Your life is not going to get much better, but you are going to get the chance to destroy a neighbor. And then one other difference, I mentioned anti-capitalism and so on. Today's far right is very vigorously pro-capitalist. You know, they have internalized a lot of the ideas of what we call neoliberalism for the last 40 years. A lot of these far right movements are quite explicitly, overtly associated with the ideas of Hayek. And I really think if fascism does mature, and we do see a mature fascist threat, it will not look like you know, a dress rehearsal of the 1920s and 1930s. We should look for differences.
I just want to get back to the for a moment of like, why now? One of the things that we heard about Trump in 2016 was this is about economic anxiety, and as opposed to economic deprivation, right? Like the difference between being, you know, I'm upper middle class and I am not sure of my material status, or maybe I'm sure of my material status, but I'm not sure of my social status.
I know in America there's the debate over economic versus status anxiety. That division doesn't really play out. They're both part of the same thing. They are intertwined and co-constitutive, like they produce one another. So for example, take racism in America. You know, that's what's usually meant by status anxiety. That is obviously a class phenomenon. It's not only a class phenomenon, but it is, if you want to look at who gets the worst jobs, who gets to shove to the bottom of every available pile, and who experiences the worst of class life, it's going to be African Americans, right? And that's true in most countries. Somebody is going to be at the bottom of the pile, and usually they'll be racialized, but their experience will also be a class experience. So they're part of the same thing. I think that the motives behind this have to do with the emotionally toxic consequences of failure and loss. Failure is really toxic in this day and age because we've had 40 years of neoliberalism in which we've been told if something goes wrong, basically you didn't handle your capital well in the marketplace. And what's more, the slope of inequality has become a lot steeper. So you've got a lot farther to fall. And then there's this culture of sadism. So we emulate winners. Donald Trump was a big winner for years. He was on The Apprentice. The libidinal high of his show was when he pointed at someone and said, "You're fired." And we're supposed to emulate that and worship that and admire that.
The other countries, their crime is way down, and our crime is not doing well. But we're going to have it do really well very soon, and we're shipping all these people back where they came from.
If you look at groups like, for example, the middle class in Germany around 1930, their terror was of joining the working class, who at that time were very poor. They didn't want to have anything to do with that. So I think the fear of being, of plunging into the abyss, of losing distinction is a big part of this. And just one last thing on that. This is another way in which economic and status anxiety are part of the same thing. You find a similar pattern with the fear of desegregation and the fear of gender norms being eroded. There's the idea that being, the richness of being is best defended by a heavily structured hierarchy in which everybody knows his place and everybody has his place. And if people start, crossing racial, gender, and class lines, then that's regarded or experienced as an impoverishment. Economic and political and historical forces ultimately work on us through our emotions and through our mental states, and we act on that basis. So, if the argument was, we have an economic crisis, recession, and that's turned people to the right, the question would be, why don't they turn to the left? Why don't they seek redistribution? Why don't they try and expropriate the expropriators, as they used to say? That would be a logical, rational thing to do. And in order to, understand that, you have to try and grapple with the raw emotions that we're all afflicted with every day. Behaving radically means getting to the root of things. It means thinking things through systematically and critically. And we don't really have much space for critical thought. We're bombarded and bludgeoned with ideas, very emotionally potent ideas, which we're never given the space to think through critically. There's structural reasons, there's historical reasons, there's economic reasons. One thing that's worth bearing in mind, there are certain types of people in this world who are not very susceptible to the far right's message. One of them is people who are in trade unions. That's a useful thing to know. Another is people who are at the very bottom, people who are, whether they're racialized or whether they're the lowest end of the working class, they're the least interested. That's also useful to know. And also there seems to be a correlation with education. So people going through the higher education system.
We have to honestly and aggressively attack the universities in this country.
Despite everything that's wrong with the higher education system, seem to come up with some sort of inoculation against those ideas.
To the extent that there is one, what is the antidote?
Okay, so you were just talking about, the way in which people respond to job losses, ecological crisis, and so on. Quite often, I would say, with a feeling of being overwhelmed, apathetic, unable to do anything about it. You begin by organizing around something like an immediate material interest, like your wages or your house price, rent, whatever. And by working together, you find gradually that you have a need for one another. And that's a radical need, the need for community. And you often find historically that when unions went on strike, they did so despite losing income. They were striking to defend their union, and that mattered more. Marx made fun of the economists, the English economists who didn't understand this. And the most radical need, I think, that Marx identified, the one that can come into existence through this process, is the need for universality. You know, you come out, you know, having defended yourself, having fought for your own interests, having found a power in community, thinking, I don't want anyone to go through this. I don't want anyone to suffer this kind of injustice or any kind of injustice. And I belong to the whole human race. So, I mean, for me, I have experienced forms of solidarity in my life in political parties and, you know, what have you. I volunteer at a local church, and every week people go down and work to help refugees, and they bring stuff that they've made, give up their free time. They don't have to do it. Nobody's forcing them to do it. But the point is that in that context, it's much easier to believe in a society based on equality and justice. If your daily life is basically capitalism and nothing but capitalism, which is basically nothing but competition, nothing but everybody around you as a competitor, an enemy, they could stick the knife in, you can't trust anyone, you know, and also a world that doesn't really make any sense because we're not giving the information to make it make sense. If that's all you've got, then it's very hard to believe in alternatives. And no wonder you turn to vengeance. No wonder you turn to what really is impotent lashing out. Demonstrations of omnipotence that amount to nothing but bloodshed. But if you have experienced the chance to be effectual, and I think that's one of the big problems, people do not feel effectual. They don't feel they have any sense of agency. Look at those MRAs and incels. When Trump was elected, they started saying things like, your body, my choice.
Your body, my choice.
This pathetic display, I think, is typical of the kind of men's rights activists grappling after some sense of their own power and agency in the deluded form of misogyny. And they're very dangerous. You know, just calling them delusional doesn't mean that they won't actually act on this and so on. But the point is, I think a lot of people feel this paralysis in their lives, and they're right to feel it because the system is set up to shut you out and stop you from organizing.
Men win again. There will never, ever be a female president. Never. There will never be a female president, ever. It's over. Glass ceiling. Dude, it's a ceiling made of bricks. You will never break it.
And they need you not to be able to experience your own potential power. So I think we need to feel a sense of empowerment by organizing together. And we need to have wins. You know, sometimes it doesn't even have to be a major win, but we need to experience a victory, because the kind of constant message of the system is there's no alternative.
When you say organize, like, you know, what does that mean for in the daily life of people and get a win?
I think of organizing, I think of the Bernie Sanders campaign, for example. I think in the UK of the Corbyn experience, it wasn't just about signing up as a member of a party or whatever. It was about the kind of exuberant passion that led to people packing meeting halls and vibrantly debating political ideas and feeling a sense that they could actually do something. It was about people knocking doors, you know, and trying to change the future of the country. Bernie Sanders, what was his big sort of phrase he kept repeating? If we stand together. And, you know, it could sound like a cliche, but coming from him, it wasn't a cliche because he meant it. He was inviting people into the improbable adventure of getting together to change the country fundamentally.
What's a version of that that is bottom up? I mean, because you know, I can't will another Bernie Sanders a figure as much as I would like to. Like, you know, and that's not incumbent upon me. And, you know, as opposed to the idea of waiting for that figure, as, you know, sitting in my home, wherever I am across the country or in, you know, anywhere else, what can I do in a concrete fashion that begins to sort of like do this thing? Like if I don't have a campaign that somebody else is waging it to join, how do I like? How do we generate that type of organization or do that organization? I guess.
Absolutely. I mean, that's kind of what a party is for, so that when you don't have the charismatic leader, you have a machinery that is also a memory, and that connects people who can be involved in this or that campaign. So I know, for example, in Los Angeles, the Democratic Socialists of America have been campaigning on housing and rent controls for a long, long time. And they don't, like they struggle with it because it's very difficult to achieve any political change. But the point is, you're meeting people, you're talking to people on the doorstep, and you're setting certain thresholds for relative success. Okay, so you want to achieve something, even if you can't achieve the main goal, you can achieve something interim. You can talk to so many people, and frankly, a lot of the work that's involved in organizing, I found the wins tend to come. They tend to come cumulatively later on down the line. So, for example, we had the Stop the War movement in the UK, biggest social movement we ever had. The wins from that, we didn't stop the Iraq War.
Right.
The wins were experienced 10 years later when they refused to vote to go and bomb Syria, and when it became controversial to support a British involvement in a war, and it changed the culture fundamentally. So I think to some extent it's about building up, organizational capacity and preparation for moments of crisis, opportunity, whatever. Partly it's about applying pressure that you're going to see the results of it further down the line. But also, I kind of hear what you're saying. I think also we need jam today. We need some wins today. It seems obvious that the kinds of campaigns that are most likely to get wins today, even though it's incredibly difficult, are the campaigns that are happening around the trade unions in America, like in Amazon and so on. And we have some of that happening here in the UK too. I think that, it might also be a rent strike campaign. It might be a campaign over the privatization of a local utility or something like that. I don't want to be too prescriptive because I think what's important is that people get a sense of the fact that they have some collective power. And also, really importantly, that they have a sense of historical belonging and historical memory, because otherwise we're floating around, we have no reference, we keep repeating the wheel, reinventing the wheel, keep trying to do things that have already been done much more effectively, or forgetting lessons from past situations that we should be remembering now. So I think that's another sort of benefit from being in an organization. You can get a much larger sense of your life and your person, and the dilemmas that you go through. An organization where people can thrash out these things and learn about themselves and their history, give you a sense of empowerment much better than anything you get from Andrew Tate fandom.
Richard Seymour, writer and commentator, author of Disaster Nationalism, The Downfall of Liberal Civilization. We'll put a link to that at majority.fm and in our podcast and YouTube description. Thanks so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.